Okay, all right, here we are. We're back again on the Hoplite channel. I am your host, Hop, and if you are here, you clicked on the video title, Samurai Lit, Yagyu Munenori, Part 3. This is the final part for the samurai and author of the Lifegiving Sword, Yagyu Munenori. Again, appreciate you coming back for Part 3 if you watched the first two parts. That's great. This part will probably be the shortest of the three since we covered a lot in the first two segments, but I felt part 3 was necessary because we'd get into the final section of the Life-Giving Sword, and we'll take some chosen readings from that section. But before doing so, I thought we would talk a little bit more about the book itself since we covered Yagyu Munenori and his life. Let's talk about the book and its themes, what Munenori was trying to get across to the reader as his understanding of Bushido, his understanding of Zen Buddhism, and how the two coincided, the practice of Bushido as a martial art and Zen Buddhism as a personal philosophy of approaching life, not just in Bushido or in martial arts, but in other walks of life and in other activities and things that you would occupy yourself with day to day. Zen Buddhism being this practice of trying to achieve higher levels of consciousness, looking to attain that unattainable goal of enlightenment, but constantly questioning truth, questioning those things that come to us via the senses, things that are passed down via tradition or by custom, things that we assume are true because they feel true, or things that we want to be true because that's in keeping with human nature. We want good things to be true for us and we want bad things to be false. But this idea of Zen Buddhism was adopted by many samurai, including Munenori, because it gave him a better frame of reference to practice his Bushido and the 8 virtues they were instructed to follow as samurai, as warriors. But as I said, let's talk about the Life-Giving Sword itself. So we see that the Life-Giving Sword breaks down into 2 main segments, and we covered the first segment in part 1, which was the death-dealing sword. And then in this segment, we'll cover the segment called the Life-Giving Sword, for which the book gets its namesake. And in these 2 segments, you see the influence of Zen Buddhism and in particular Taoism, which Taoism, again, was a practice of a philosophy, a religion of sorts, in China, just as Zen Buddhism was. But it's amazing the effect both religions and philosophies had on the Japanese culture during the period of Yagyu Munenori and this age of the samurai. That the yin and the yang were the balance. Without day, what would night be? Without night, what would the day be? Without the darkness, what good is the light? If there was constant light, if there was constant dark. These two, however, because we are given equal measures of both, you could say we, on average, have 12 hours of light, 12 hours of day. This is the yin and the yang. This is the balance that nature has afforded us. We may have a winter, but spring will follow. And then summer will follow spring. But then fall will follow summer. And this constant ebb and flow of fluctuation seems to be chaotic, but if you step back and look at the yin and the yang, the balance in life, you will see that the balance in these ebbs and flows gives meaning to life, gives balance and gives order and lack of chaos. And so you have the order and the chaos being the yin and the yang. You have the life and the death being the yin and the yang. You have war and peace. If you have the life of a samurai in Bushido, there are times of war and the balance is given to you in times of peace. Just as the life of a great samurai and his works is juxtaposed against perhaps the death that will await him after his life is complete, or the death that he has dealt other samurai that have faced him on the field of battle. It's an interesting thing that we look at life sometimes as, oh, I wonder why this happened at a certain point, or I wonder why this was the case when it looked like that was a very unlikely outcome. And the Taoists would say in the yin and the yang, the questions are natural to have, but we must understand that because the universe has given us these periods of balance, of night and day, of war and peace, of life and death, of growing and harvesting and then wilting, we must understand that there must be balance in everything that happens in our life. It is up to fate. And I think Munenori, in his book Lifegiving Sword, explains as much in the death dealing and the life-giving sword segments, where he says that to kill and to take life, you must preserve life. There must be balance, there must be order to the yin and the yang that is your Bushido art. You must not deal death as though it is in and of itself justifiable, because there is no balance to that, there is no truth. Just the same, you must not perpetually give life on accord of anyone or anything, because there is no balance to that either. It is the constant ebb and flow of taking and receiving, of giving and receiving, of providing and being provided for, of cutting down and being cut down. These things happen naturally over the course of human existence. And to be a wielder of the sword, you must understand that the balance is to deal death, but to also give life, if you are to maintain your own sense of balance of the yin and the yang in your practice. And never be a tyrant who wields a death-dealing blade, and never be a sheep who only seeks to preserve life for the sake of life being preserved. And he mentions this, we'll get to the readings that cover this, in having the mind of no mind, in that your ordinary mind must not be clouded by thoughts of life and death, of glory, of defeat, of embarrassment, or of pride. You must embrace the mind of no mind. And once you do that, once you let your mind go so that your mind can return to yourself, just the same as he said in one of the passages in part 2 we did, that a dog is not properly raised on a leash. If you truly have mastery over your dog, you can let him run away and do whatever he does for a time being, but know that he will always return to you. That is a properly raised dog that respects his master. That doesn't have to be constantly yanked on and disciplined with the pull of a leash. But the dog that respects his master and is properly trained will go away and come back on many occasions, and the master never has to worry about whether the dog will return or the dog will obey. The same is the mind of no mind. You must not keep your mind on a leash. You must let it go, but never let your mind go if you are not confident you have mastered your mind, that it will return to you when you want it to. And to have this ability is what you needed, to have the ability of the sword of no sword. And Takuan Soho mentions that in Unfettered Mind, that this discipline of the Yagyu Shinkage Ryu, of facing your opponent empty-handed and letting your mind go to the point where your opponent's sword will become your sword, where you can use his momentum, his lack of balance, his commitment to attack or his refrain from attack to your advantage, manipulate his hands, his movement, his body, take his sword from him, and then cut him down with his own sword. This is the art of no sword. Very difficult. And if you do not have the ability to master your mind so that you are of the mind of no mind, you cannot master the sword that is the sword of no sword. Okay, like I said, let's move this on. We'll keep it shorter than the previous segments. We'll move on to some readings of the Life-Giving Sword, and we'll talk a little bit about it. Okay, we jump into page 119, and this is under the heading on the no sword. And Yagyu said, "No sword means not being cut by another, although you yourself have no sword. What is called no sword is not the art of taking a man's sword. It is being able to use all implements freely. When you have no sword and want to take your opponent's use as your own, anything that comes to your hands should be of use. Even if you only have a fan, you should not be able to you should not be able to defeat your opponent's sword. No sword is precisely this attitude. From the very beginning, however, the fundamental meaning is not the taking of a sword, it is the clear understanding of distance." Okay, so what he was saying there is that, again, this goes back to being of the mind of no mind, in that when you seek to take your opponent's sword, you must, when you have no sword and want to take your opponent's to use as your own, anything that comes into your hands should be of use. Even if you only have a fan, you should be able to defeat your opponent's sword. No sword is precisely this attitude. So what he is saying is that your objective is to attain your opponent's sword to strike him down. But you must not think of his sword, because you are using the mind, and the mind that is thinking about the sword is not the mind of no mind. It is the mind that abides in the place of your opponent's sword. And I think in the style they mention that do not think of trying to take your opponent's sword if he is not willing to give it, if he is not committed to his attack, if he has not given you the opportunity to disarm him. If you only have a fan in your hand, use the fan to distract him so that you can attain the sword. But do not become so fixated upon his weapon that if you cannot wrest it from him, you don't believe you have the ability to succeed. The mind of no mind is the mind of the no sword. The sword is just the implement you are trying to attain. It is the end goal, but it is not the only goal. As you try to attain that sword, you must not become fixated upon that object as your only means of success. Right. Okay. We move now to page 123. And he says, even in entering or exiting through a gate, you do not fall into inattention. Constantly keeping these things in mind is potential. Because this potential is always within, in case of an emergency, you will be capable of some commendable quick action. This is called great function. Potential will mature and great function will issue forth if you continually maintain awareness and accumulate effort in all your abilities. Okay, so what's he saying there? Constant attention is potential. Potential will enable great function. This harkens back to the story I mentioned in part 2 of Yagyu Munenori, where the Shogun Imitsu and Munenori were watching a play. And the Shogun asked Munenori, while the play was going on, to focus on this one actor in particular, and to tell him later if the actor ever broke his concentration, if there was ever a moment where he could have cut the actor down. And he mentions that the only time he saw an opening was at the very end, before the actor exited the play and walked off stage. He saw him breathe this sigh of relief at the pillar right before he exited, and said, this is the only point I saw him ever break concentration, and it was at the very end, and at that moment was when I would have struck and cut him down. So constant attention is potential. He maintained constant attention on the actor. The actor was in constant attention of his own art as the actor in this play. And this potential will enable great function, and that is the ability as a Bushido to cut someone down. Great attention, great constant attention, and great function for the actor in the theater is to pull off a magnificent performance. And he said, the constant attention, though, is the beginning point. And this actor, by letting out this sigh of relief, believed that he was off the stage completely and he was out of the sight of any of the people watching, but he wasn't. So he broke this constant attention for 1 second. And he said that was the hair's breadth, as Munenori said in part 2, where he would have been able to break the concentration and the mind of the actor had he been a samurai. And at that moment, that was the part he would have struck and cut him down. Right, so constant attention is potential. Potential will enable great function. And great function is your art in the samurai caste, and Bushido being your way. Okay, last reading. We jump to page 124. And he says, another matter that should be mentioned is the stare. If glared at by a man of great potential, your mind will be arrested by that look, and you are likely to just stand there forgetting that you have a hand with which to draw your sword. When a cat stares at a mouse, the mouse will fall off the rafter. The mouse's attention is caught by the cat's glare. It forgets the very feet that do its walking and falls. Meeting a man with great potential is like a mouse meeting a cat. There is no established rule, means that a man of this caliber does not in the least adhere to practice and drills. Rules mean practice, drills, and regulation. Regulation exists in all disciplines, but the man who has reached the deepest principles of his discipline can dispense with them as he pleases. This is complete freedom. and a man of great potential and great function has freedom beyond the rules. Okay, this one's cool. This is a good reading to end on. So he mentions that a master of his art who is in control of himself and who has dedicated his life to Bushido with Zen Buddhism as his philosophy as well, can foster this constant attention, just as he did with the actor on the stage. And the actor on the stage actually in that story mentions to one of his fellow actors, I noticed one man in the crowd, and it was only his gaze I felt through the whole play. It was as though he was studying my every move. Through the whole performance, I never felt his eyes leave my form. And this was what he is alluding to in this passage, the cat's glare. The mouse doesn't fail because he is unable to get away. He fails because he cannot keep his mind from seeing the cat's glare and becoming lost in it. He does not have the mind of no mind. He has the mind captured by the cat's glare. This constant attention, this potential provides with great function. And he mentions in the last part of this passage that the man who has mastered this constant attention, and this is manifested into great potential of function, can free himself of the rules and regulations because he is of the mind of no mind. He has mastered his craft, his arts of Bushido, of swordsmanship, of empty-handed combat, of the no sword, that his form is now formless. His effort is effortless. He breathes just as easily as he walks. He draws his sword and feathers his katana in combat just as easily as a lady fans herself with her pocket fan. It is second nature to him. He doesn't even think about it. He is beyond free. He is formless. He is like water. And when you encounter a man like this, it's sometimes you know these people when you see them, that nothing stirs them. Their eyes are like beams of light. Like you see like a serpent's eyes, they cut through and just look almost like stone. But they see everything. They know what is going on. They have been here before, and they are formless. They don't think about what they have to do anymore simply because they are confident in their ability to be of the mind of no mind and to use the sword of no sword if that has to be a discipline or a practice necessary for their survival. But they are the cat with that glare. You don't want to be the mouse who's caught in that stare. You want to be a cat staring at a cat. You don't want to be the mouse in the rafters who can't think about what he's doing correctly because he is so intimidated by the master who has the cat's glare, the eye of the tiger, as it were. If you're familiar with the Rocky franchise, that's exactly what Munenori is talking about. And as a samurai, with his renown and with his abilities, he was definitely of that mind. Okay, that'll conclude part 3 for Yagyu Munenori. I appreciate everybody for hanging around for this last part. Again, I said I would keep it as brief as I could for the third part because we covered a lot in the first 2. But nevertheless, appreciate your coming by. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you're liking the channel, subscribe. As always, share it with family or friends if you think they're anyone that could be interested in samurai literature or learning about the famous samurai like Munenori. And we will move on now into the other works of samurai literature, and I will cover the Demon Sermon on the Martial Arts, which is a cool one. It's not as well known as the Book of the Five Rings or the Hagakure or the Lifegiving Sword, but it's a very good read all the same. So anyway, we will see you next time for the Demon Sermon. Till then, and as always, take it easy.